13 years ago, I found a 5-year-old girl hiding alone inside a house where her entire family was gone. She couldn't tell me what happened that night, so I took her in and promised to protect her for the rest of my life. She grew up in silence, using only her paintings to express the memories she could never explain. Then, 13 years later, she placed a new portrait in front of me. I looked at the woman's face she had drawn, and I froze. My hands went cold. My heart started racing because I knew that face. Welcome to Revenge, Dad, and thank you for choosing to spend your time here. Before the story starts, tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining us from today? Let's see how far this community reaches. Note some elements in this story are fictional, added for storytelling and educational purposes. Similarities to any names or locations are coincidental, but the lesson at the heart of it is real. The rain had been falling for 3 hours by the time I turned onto Crescent Ridge Drive, and it showed no signs of stopping. My windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the downpour, smearing the red and blue pulse of patrol car lights into long, bleeding streaks across the wet glass. I had been a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department for over 2 decades. I had worked homicides in Compton, Watts, Hollywood, and everywhere in between. I thought I had seen enough of this city's darkness to recognize it on sight. I was wrong that night. I cut the engine and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit me immediately, sharper than it had any right to be for November in Southern California. A uniformed officer named Reyes met me at the perimeter tape, his face tight, his eyes already carrying something he was trying hard not to show. "What do we have?" I asked. "3 victims, Reyes said. His voice came out clipped professional, but his jaw was working like he was chewing on the words before letting them out. "Father, mother, teenage son. No signs of forced entry on the back door, but the front lock was bypassed clean. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." "Robbery." Reyes shook his head. "Nothing taken. Wallets, jewelry, a laptop sitting open on the kitchen table. All of it still there." I ducked under the tape and walked toward the house. The Marsh residence was a 2-story colonial on a quiet street in Glendale, the kind of neighborhood where people left their garage doors open during the day and knew their neighbors by name. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, its net dark and dripping. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing, pink streamers hanging wet from the handlebars. My chest tightened before I even stepped through the front door. James Marsh was 44 years old, according to the preliminary report I had been handed in the car, an internal auditor for a financial consulting firm. He was found in the living room near the couch. His wife, Linda, 41, had been discovered in the kitchen doorway. Their son, Tyler, 16, was at the base of the stairs, one hand still stretched toward the railing as if he had been trying to run. I moved through the house the way I had trained myself to move through crime scenes, methodically, deliberately cataloging everything without letting any single detail stop me for too long. The forensics team was already working. Cameras flashed. Someone was sketching the layout on a notepad. The whole choreography of tragedy was underway. But something was pulling at me. A feeling I had learned not to ignore in 3 decades on the job. The feeling that I had not yet seen everything there was to see. I moved toward the hallway, then toward the staircase, then up. The master bedroom was undisturbed. Tyler's room, a mess of sports posters and textbooks, showed no signs of struggle. But the door at the end of the hall, smaller, painted pale yellow, with a hand-lettered sign that read, "Emily's room," in uneven crayon letters, was cracked open. My hand found the doorframe. I pushed it gently. The room was dim lit only by the faint orange glow of a nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon. Stuffed animals lined a shelf above the bed. Drawings were taped to the walls, crayon houses, stick figure families, a lopsided sun with too many rays. On the desk, a sketchbook lay open to a half-finished drawing of what appeared to be a garden. And in the corner between the dresser and the wall, a little girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest. She was 5 years old. She was wearing pajamas printed with small yellow stars. Her dark hair was tangled, and there was a smear of something on her cheek that I chose not to examine too closely. She was holding a sketchbook against her chest, with both arms gripping it, the way you grip something, when it is the only solid thing left in the world. She was not crying. She was not making a sound. Her eyes were open, fixed on a point somewhere past my left shoulder, and they were the eyes of someone who had traveled very far away from the room she was sitting in. I holstered my flashlight. I crouched down, slowly getting myself as low as I could until I was eye level with her. My knees ached from the cold and the crouching, but I did not move. "Hey there," I said. My voice came out softer than I expected. "My name is Daniel. I'm going to help you." Okay, you're safe now. I've got you. She did not respond. Her grip on the sketchbook tightened slightly, her small knuckles going white. You don't have to say anything, I told her. You don't have to do anything. I'm just going to sit here with you for a minute. And I did. I sat on the floor of that little yellow room, with the rain hammering the window and the sounds of the forensics team echoing up from downstairs. And I stayed with her until I saw the very faintest shift in her eyes, a flicker like a candle that had almost gone out, deciding to keep burning. Emily, I said quietly because her name was on the report and I needed her to know I saw her, that she was a person and not a detail. My name is Daniel. Can I carry you out of here? She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time, and the pain behind those eyes hit me somewhere beneath my ribs so hard I had to breathe through it. She did not speak, but she opened her arms just slightly, just enough. I lifted her carefully, sketchbook and all. She weighed almost nothing. She pressed her face against my shoulder, and I carried her out of that room, down the hall, past the forensics cameras and the yellow tape and the rain-soaked uniforms, and I did not put her down. In the back of the ambulance, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket that was too large for her small body, Emily opened the sketchbook. She did not have a pencil, but she lifted one finger and began to trace invisible shapes on the blank page, slow, deliberate, repeating the same pattern over and over. A curve, a line, a curve, a line. I watched her do it, and I felt the cold settle into my bones in a way that had nothing to do with the November rain. I did not know what she was drawing. I did not know what she had seen that night, or what her small mind was trying to hold on to, or let go of, or make sense of, in the only language she had left. What I knew was, this 3 people were dead in that house on Crescent Ridge Drive, and this little girl was still alive. And every instinct I had developed in over 3 decades of working the worst days of other people's lives was telling me that those 2 facts were connected in a way I did not yet understand. I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers, stilling the invisible drawing. "I've got you," I said again. This time, she did not pull away. The emergency room at Glendale Memorial smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, and every light in the place was the kind of white that made the world look smaller than it actually was. I sat in a plastic chair outside the pediatric examination room, with my elbows on my knees and my hands clasped in front of me, and I stared at the linoleum floor and tried to remember the last time I had felt this unsteady on my feet. Emily had not made a sound since the ambulance, not when the paramedics checked her over. Not when the nurse had tried to take her temperature and she had pressed herself back against the gurney railing so hard it rattled. Not when Dr. Brennan, the on-call pediatrician, had crouched in front of her and introduced himself in the careful, gentle voice that doctors learn for exactly these situations. She had simply held her sketchbook and looked through everyone as if they were made of glass. Dr. Brennan found me in the hallway around midnight. He was a compact man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of eyes that had seen too much without becoming hard. "Physically, she's uninjured," he said. "No signs of direct trauma to her person, but what she witnessed tonight..." He paused and pressed his lips together. "Detective, I want to refer her immediately to a trauma specialist. What I'm seeing is consistent with acute stress disorder. In children, her age, if it's not addressed properly, it can develop into something longer lasting. Selective mutism, chronic PTSD. Selective mutism, I repeated. It means the brain essentially locks down verbal communication in response to overwhelming trauma. Brennan explained, his voice steady and clinical, but not unkind. She may be able to speak normally about everyday things, what she wants for breakfast, what color her shoes are, but anything connected to what she experienced tonight, anything that brings her close to that memory, her mind will simply refuse to let the words through. It's a protective mechanism, the brain trying to keep itself from breaking." I looked through the small window in the examination room door. Emily was sitting on the edge of the examination table, her sketchbook in her lap, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. A nurse had placed a thin hospital blanket around her shoulders. She had not pulled it tighter, but she had not shrugged it off either. "What happens to her now?" I asked. "In terms of placement?" Dr. Brennan sighed, the kind of sigh that carried paperwork in it. "Child Protective Services has already been notified. A caseworker is on the way. If no suitable next of kin can be located, she'll enter the foster care system." My stomach dropped. The caseworker arrived 40 minutes later. His name was Harrison, mid-30s, tired eyes, the practiced efficiency of someone who processed too many cases and still somehow cared about each one. He shook my hand and pulled out a tablet and began going through his checklist, with the speed of a man who had done it several hundred times. Parents deceased, he said. One sibling also deceased. Paternal grandparents' grandfather has advanced dementia. Grandmother deceased last year. Maternal side one aunt in Portland, but she's currently undergoing treatment for a serious illness and has already indicated she's not in a position to take on a child. He looked up from the screen. Detective Carter, unless someone steps forward in the next several days, Emily will be placed in temporary foster care while we process the case. I looked through that window again. Emily had opened her sketchbook. She did not have a pencil. I watched her look around for one, and when she could not find any, she curled her fingers and pressed her knuckles against the blank page, instead dragging them slowly across the paper, in the same repeating pattern I had seen in the ambulance. A curve, a line, a curve, a line. Something cracked open in the center of my chest that I had not felt crack in a very long time. I want to apply for guardianship, I heard myself say. Harrison lowered his tablet. Detective, I know the process, I said. Home study, background check, court hearing. I've been on the job for over 3 decades. My record is clean, my house is stable, and I'm not going to sit here and watch that little girl get handed off to strangers. My voice came out harder than I intended, and I pulled it back. I want to apply. Tell me what I need to do. Harrison looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. It takes approximately 3 months. Home study first, then background verification, then a hearing before a family court judge. In California, the court's primary consideration is the child's best interest. Given your record and your direct involvement in her case, you have a reasonable chance. He paused. But, Detective, this isn't a small thing. I know it isn't, I said. The investigation moved fast, and then hit a wall. Within 72 hours, our primary suspect, a man named Marcus Teller, a hired enforcer with 2 prior assault convictions, was identified through forensic evidence recovered from the Marsh residence. We had his prints. We had a partial fiber match. We were 48 hours from bringing him in for questioning, and then Marcus Teller drove his car off Highway 2 in the La Crescenta foothills at 2 in the morning and died on impact. The official finding was an accident. Icy road conditions, excessive speed, no skid marks to suggest braking. But I had been doing this job long enough to know the difference between bad luck and a clean removal, and every instinct I had was screaming that Marcus Teller had been silenced before he could be questioned. I could not prove it. I had no thread to pull, no name to attach to the order. Without a living suspect, without a clear motive, the Marsh case stalled, and then it was quietly reclassified as a cold case filed away in the system, with every other tragedy that had run out of answers. I hated that word, cold, as if the truth could be stored at a low enough temperature that it stopped mattering. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in February 2009, I sat in a family court hearing room in Pasadena and watched a judge review the completed home study report, the background verification, the recommendation from the CPS caseworker, and the letter from Dr. Patricia Howe, the trauma specialist Emily had been seeing twice a week since December. Emily sat beside me in a chair that was slightly too large for her, wearing a blue dress that the foster family had bought for the occasion. She was holding her sketchbook. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Delgado, looked over her glasses at me. Mr. Carter, she said, do you understand that guardianship is a long-term commitment and that the well-being of this child will be your legal and moral responsibility? Yes, Your Honor, I said. And you're prepared for that responsibility fully, not theoretically. I looked at Emily. She was looking back at me, her dark eyes serious and careful, her hands wrapped around the sketchbook. And I felt that crack in my chest open a little wider, not painfully this time, but like a door swinging on a hinge that had been rusted shut for years. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Judge Delgado signed the order. That evening, Emily carried her sketchbook through the front door of my house on Devonshire Street in the San Fernando Valley. She stood in the entryway and looked around at the living room, the kitchen visible through the doorway, the staircase leading up to the room I had spent 3 weeks painting pale yellow because I had remembered the color of the walls in her room on Crescent Ridge Drive. She looked at everything carefully, the way a person looks at something they are trying to decide whether to trust. Then she walked to the kitchen table, sat down, pulled out her sketchbook, and began to draw. At 3 in the morning, I heard the soft scratch of pencil on paper from downstairs. I came down to find her still at the table, still drawing, her face bent low over the page. The drawing was all spirals and sharp angles and lines that crossed each other without meeting. It looked like a storm trying to find its shape. My throat tightened so sharply it hurt. I did not disturb her. I pulled a chair to the far end of the table and sat down, and I stayed with her in the quiet until exhaustion finally pulled her head down to her folded arms, and she slept, her pencil still loosely in her hand. I reached over and turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the rain had started again. Nobody tells you what it actually looks like raising a child who has been through the kind of thing Emily had been through. The books talk about patience and consistency and creating a safe environment. The therapists and Dr. Patricia Howe was one of the best I had ever encountered talk about building trust, slowly, like laying down one brick at a time on ground that might still shift beneath you. What the books and the therapists do not fully prepare you for is the texture of it. The specific daily, unglamorous texture of learning to live alongside someone else's grief. The first year was the hardest. Emily communicated in the ways that were available to her. A nod for yes, a slight shake of the head for no. Pieces of paper torn from her sketchbook, words printed in her careful, deliberate handwriting. I'm hungry, I can't sleep. Can we leave the hall light on? I bought a whiteboard and mounted it on the kitchen wall at her height, and she used it the way other kids use their voices, erasing and rewriting throughout the day. I learned to read her silences the way a navigator reads weather, not as absence, but as information. Dr. Howe had explained it to me clearly in those first months. Emily's selective mutism isn't stubbornness, and it isn't a choice, she had said, leaning forward in her office chair with her hands clasped on her desk. Her brain has essentially built a wall around the traumatic experience and everything connected to it. Pushing her to talk before she's ready won't bring the wall down. It will just make her build it thicker. So, what do? I had asked. We give her time, Howe had said, and we give her other languages. The sketchbook was one language. I found others. I signed her up for an art class at the community center on Reseda Boulevard. When she was 7, she walked in the first day holding my hand, so tight my fingers went numb, and by the end of the hour she had produced a watercolor of a tree in winter that the instructor pinned to the classboard without saying a word, just nodding, with the kind of slow, recognizing nod that meant she understood she was dealing with something different from the usual. I taught her to ride a bicycle in the parking lot of a church 2 blocks from our house on a Saturday morning in March, running alongside her until my lungs burned, and she was laughing. Actually laughing, the sound of it, so unexpected and so sharp that I had to stop running and put my hands on my knees just to get my breath back, because I had not heard her laugh before, and it was the most painful and beautiful thing I had ever heard at the same time. We found a rhythm. It took time and it was imperfect, and there were nights when she woke up crying from dreams she could not describe, and I sat on the floor outside her bedroom door until the sounds stopped, because I had learned early that knocking sometimes made it worse. There were days when she would not leave her room, when the sketchbook absorbed everything she had, and there was nothing left over for the world outside. I learned not to force those days. I left food outside her door, and I waited. I also kept the Marsh file. Every night after Emily went to sleep, I spread the case documents across the kitchen table. Crime scene photographs, autopsy reports. The forensics summary, the thin evidence log that always ended in the same place: Marcus Teller, deceased, Highway 2, case suspended. I knew the file by heart. I had memorized every detail, every inconsistency, every thread that had gone nowhere. I could not let it go. 3 people had died in that house on Crescent Ridge Drive, and whoever had ordered it was still breathing free air somewhere, and that fact sat in my chest like a splinter too deep to reach. I met Victoria in the spring of 2010 at a fundraising event for the Alliance for Children's Mental Health at a hotel in Woodland Hills. I had gone because Dr. Howe had mentioned the organization, and I had thought in the vague, hopeful way of a man who is mostly running on stubbornness and black coffee that meeting other people navigating similar situations might be useful. Victoria Harmon was seated at the table next to mine. She had dark hair and quiet eyes, and the particular stillness of someone who listens more than they speak. She introduced herself, simply her name, that she worked in community outreach for a nonprofit focused on foster care advocacy. We talked through dinner and through the program that followed, and when the event ended, she wrote her phone number on a paper napkin and handed it to me without ceremony. "You seem like someone who needs a friend more than a date," she said. "No offense intended," I laughed for the first time in longer than I could remember. "None taken." What I did not know then, what I would not know for 11 more years, was that Victoria's presence at that event was not the accident it appeared to be. She had known who I was before she sat down. She had followed Emily's case from a distance for over a year, watching from the outside to make sure the little girl she had failed to save was safe. When she saw that Emily was cared for, she had not been able to stay away. The guilt that had lived in her chest since November 2008 had driven her forward the way some hungers drive people toward the things they know will cost them. But I did not know any of that yet. All I knew was that she made me laugh, and that when I brought her home for dinner 6 weeks later, Emily looked at her across the kitchen table with those careful, assessing eyes, and then reached into her sketchbook and tore out a drawing she had made that afternoon and slid it across the table toward Victoria without a word. It was a drawing of two people and a dog. We did not have a dog, but the taller figure was clearly meant to be me, and the smaller one was clearly meant to be Emily, and the third figure standing beside us had dark hair. Victoria's eyes went bright with tears she did not let fall. She picked up the drawing and held it carefully the way you hold something that might break. "Can I keep this?" she asked. Emily nodded once solemnly, as if she had made a formal decision. We were married in September 2011 in a small ceremony at the Descanso Gardens in La Cañada, Flintridge. Emily was 8 years old and stood beside me in a pale blue dress, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. When the officiant asked if anyone had any words they wanted to share, Emily reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it up. She had drawn the three of us standing together under a large tree, the sun bright and yellow above us. And at the bottom, she had written in her careful letters, "We are a family now." There was not a dry eye in the garden. My own throat closed so completely I could not have spoken if my life depended on it. Victoria pressed her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. That same year, sometime in the fall, while Victoria and I were downstairs clearing dinner, Emily was in her room. I did not know it then, but she was sitting cross-legged on her bed, with a fresh page open in her sketchbook. She was drawing something she had not drawn before a figure standing in a doorway, the hallway light behind him, casting a warm glow around his shoulders. A man, tall and solid, standing between her and the darkness beyond the door. She drew it carefully with more deliberateness than any 8-year-old should have, and when she was finished, she folded the page in half and slid it under the corner of her mattress where it would stay for the next 10 years. I retired from LAPD in 2018 after 35 years. The department threw a small party. Roy Chambers, my partner for most of those years, shook my hand and said, "You were the best detective I ever worked with, Carter. I mean that." I thanked him and drove home and found Emily at the kitchen table working on a canvas that was nearly as tall as she was, her brush moving in long, confident strokes. She looked up when I came in. "You're home early," she said, one of the longer sentences she had offered me in recent months. "I retired today," I said. She considered that for a moment. Then she nodded, turned back to her canvas, and said, "Good." She was 15. It was the best review of my career. By the summer of 2021, Emily was 18 years old, and the paintings on the walls of her room had changed. For years, they had been landscapes abstracts, the quiet visual experiments of a girl, exploring what color and line could do. But sometime in the spring, something had shifted. The new paintings were larger, darker. They moved differently with an urgency that had not been there before, as if her hand were trying to outrun something her mind had not yet caught up to. I noticed. I did not say anything. I watched the way I had learned to watch quietly from a careful distance, trusting that if she was ready to show me, she would show me. But the paintings kept changing, and something in the pit of my stomach, some old investigator's instinct that had never fully gone quiet, began to pay attention in a way I had not expected. The paintings had taken over Emily's room, the way weather takes over a landscape gradually and then all at once. I stood in her doorway one morning in late July with my coffee mug in hand, and for the first time, I did not look at them the way a father looks at his daughter's work. No warmth, no quiet pride. I looked at them the way I used to look at a crime scene methodically, without blinking, starting at the edges and working toward the center, looking for the thing that did not fit, or in this case, the thing that kept appearing when it had no business appearing at all. There were 14 canvases on the walls and another 6 stacked against the baseboard. The older ones I recognized soft landscapes, color studies, and blue and green, the unhurried experiments of a girl teaching herself what paint could do. Those paintings felt like breathing. The newer ones did not. They were larger, their brushstrokes faster and more urgent, as if the hand making them were trying to outrun something the mind had not yet named. The colors had shifted into territory I had not seen in her work before. Deep burgundies that looked almost arterial, heavy grays, blacks, so dense they seemed to pull the surrounding light into themselves rather than reflect it. And within all of that darkness, shapes, recurring, specific, deliberate. Emily was downstairs. I could hear the faint sound of the radio she kept on low in the kitchen while she made coffee in the mornings. That particular domestic sound that had been part of the texture of our house for years. I stepped fully into her room, something I rarely did without asking a boundary I had learned to respect when she was 9 and had communicated it clearly through a note left on her door that read, "Please knock," and moved closer to the nearest large canvas. A figure, standing in what appeared to be a doorway or entrance. The figure was indistinct, more suggested than rendered, no clear face, no clear hands, but the posture was specific, a woman's posture. Behind the figure, loose, impressionistic strokes that read as rain, and on the figure's left side near the wrist, a small curved mark that I could not immediately identify from where I was standing. I got closer. The mark was no larger than a thumbprint, but Emily had returned to it again and again. I could tell by the way the paint was layered there, the surface slightly raised compared to the surrounding canvas built up through multiple sessions of careful, deliberate attention. I took out my phone and photographed every painting in the room. All 20, including the 6, stacked against the baseboard, which I lifted and turned one by one to capture both sides. That afternoon, I drove to Dr. Howe's office on Ventura Boulevard in Sherman Oaks. The waiting room smelled like bergamot and old paperback books, the particular combination that had always struck me as deeply intentional. Patricia Howe had been Emily's therapist since March of 2009, and in the 12 years since she had become one of the people I trusted most in the world. Not because she had fixed anything, but because she had understood from the beginning that some things were not hers to fix. She was already standing when I came through the door, which told me the expression on my face had communicated something before I had said a word. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me." I laid the photographs across her desk. 20 prints still warm from the copy shop on Ventura, where I had stopped on the way over. She studied each one the way she studied everything, with a particular quality of attention that gave nothing away. Her breathing slow, her eyes moving across the surface of each image without hurrying. "She's been painting like this since April," I said when the quiet had stretched long enough. "I need you to tell me what you see." Dr. Howe turned a photograph sideways, then back. "How long have you been noticing this specific shift?" "Honestly, I think I've been seeing it for months without letting myself look at it directly." My hands tightened on the edge of her desk. "But I looked this morning, really looked." "And what did you find?" "Recurring elements," I said. "The same details appearing across multiple paintings. A figure in a dark coat, red. A necklace, silver leaf-shaped. Light coming from below and behind like headlights seen from ground level. And a mark on the left wrist that I can't identify from the photographs alone." Dr. Howe set the photographs down and folded her hands on top of them. Her expression had shifted, not dramatically, but enough that I caught it the way you catch a change in air pressure before weather arrives. Daniel," she said carefully, "what you are describing is something we see in trauma survivors with early childhood PTSD. It has a name: peripheral memory encoding. When the brain experiences an overwhelming traumatic event, especially in very young children, it protects itself by refusing to fully encode the central image, the face, the direct experience. Instead, it stores what surrounds it, details that were in the periphery. The color of clothing, the shape of jewelry, a small mark on the skin." She paused. "These details get locked in at full clarity sometimes, even with enhanced precision, while the central memory remains blurred or inaccessible." I stared at her. "You're saying Emily didn't paint those details because she chose to. She painted them because they are the only part her brain actually retained in sharp focus." "It's possible," Howe said. "And if that's what's happening, then what you are looking at in those photographs is not creative expression." She held my gaze steadily. "It is memory." The word landed somewhere in my chest with a weight that made it hard to inhale normally. "Or," I said, "she does know exactly what she's painting, and she can't say it out loud." Dr. Howe did not look away. That is also possible. And I want you to hear me say this clearly. Both possibilities concern me. One means her trauma is resurfacing in a new form. The other means she has been carrying knowledge she cannot verbalize, possibly for a very long time. A pause. Either way, Daniel, something has shifted. And you were right to bring these to me. I drove home on the 101 with the photographs on the passenger seat and my mind running faster than the traffic. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already decided what I needed to do next. I spread all 14 photographs across the kitchen table and stood over them with a focus I had not applied to anything in 3 years. I found a legal pad in the kitchen drawer and made a list. Dark red coat or jacket appeared in 9 paintings. Silver necklace leaf-shaped appeared in 6 paintings. Low-angle light source consistent with vehicle headlights appeared in 11 paintings. Small curved mark left wrist area appeared in 4 paintings. I kept returning to the last item. The mark was too consistent, too specific to be decorative filler. In the 2 clearest photographs, I could make out the internal structure, delicate layered lines, a petal arrangement radiating from a small central point. It was a tattoo, small, floral. The kind of design that a person would choose deliberately place, deliberately, and wear every day without thinking about it anymore, because it had simply become part of the landscape of their own skin. I was still leaning over those 2 photographs when I heard Victoria's key in the front door. She came through into the kitchen with her canvas tote over one shoulder, slightly flushed from the warm afternoon, and stopped when she saw the photographs spread across the table. "What are all these?" she asked. "Photographs of Emily's paintings," I said. "I took them this morning." She moved closer and leaned over the table, her weight shifting onto her left hand for balance. Her left hand came down on the table's edge inches from the photograph, where the wrist mark was most clearly visible. She looked at the images for a moment, her head tilted slightly the way she tilted it when she was reading or looking at something that required attention. "They're striking," she said. "She's incredibly talented. Has she always painted this dark?" "No," I said, "just recently." She straightened up, picked up her tote, and moved toward the hallway. "I'll start dinner. You want pasta?" "Sure," I said. I waited. Her footsteps crossed the hallway, went up the stairs. The bedroom door opened and closed. I turned back to the table. I flipped the largest photograph, the one taken of the back of Emily's biggest canvas, and zoomed in on the lower right corner of the image, a detail I had noticed this morning, but filed away for later without fully registering what I was seeing. Emily's handwriting, careful, deliberate. The same printing she had used since she was 7 years old. A date, November 14th, 2008. The coffee mug slipped from my hand. I caught it before it hit the table, but the sudden grab sent pain shooting through my fingers, my knuckles locking white around the handle. I set it down slowly, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped being completely reliable. I looked at the date, I looked at the photographs. I looked at the doorway where Victoria had been standing 30 seconds ago, her left hand resting on the table's edge, inches from the clearest image of that small floral mark. And for the first time in 13 years, the Marsh case stopped feeling cold. I did not go to bed that night. After Victoria turned off the light in our bedroom and the house went quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with all 14 photographs spread in front of me and the magnifying glass I had dug out of the junk drawer. The same scratch lens I had used for years on the job. The clock above the refrigerator read 11:47. Outside, the San Fernando Valley had settled into its nighttime stillness, the distant sound of a car on Devonshire, the only reminder that the world was still moving. I was not functioning as a father anymore. I went through the photographs the way I used to go through crime scene documentation, starting at the edges of each image, working toward the center, cataloging without interpreting, gathering before concluding. 35 years of training had made it automatic. I followed it now because it was the only way I knew to keep my hands from shaking. I had gone through the first 3 items already: the red jacket, the silver necklace, the low-angle light source, and each one had confirmed what I did not want to confirm. I pressed my palms flat on the table between items and made myself breathe. Then I moved to the 4th, the one I had circled 3 times without remembering doing it. Small floral mark left wrist. I pulled the 2 clearest photographs toward me and positioned the magnifying glass. The mark was no larger than a coin, but the detail Emily had put into it was extraordinary for something rendered at that scale. Not smeared, not approximate. Precise. delicate curved lines, petals layered over one another in a specific radial arrangement. The kind of design that requires a clear visual reference and the clear intention to reproduce it accurately. I knew exactly what cherry blossom tattoos looked like. I had been looking at one every morning for 11 years. The magnifying glass hit the table with a sound that was too loud for the quiet house. My hands were flat on the surface now, pressing into it as if I needed something solid beneath them. My lungs had stopped working in any normal rhythm. I was pulling in short, shallow breaths that were not enough, and I knew it, and I could not make it stop. 11 years. The number moved through me, not like a thought, but like something with weight and temperature. 11 years of that tattoo on the inside of Victoria's left wrist. Every morning across the breakfast table when she reached for the coffee pot. Every evening on the couch when she turned the pages of her book, her wrist catching the lamplight. 11 years of it becoming so familiar that I had stopped seeing it the way you stop hearing the refrigerator hum. 11 years of Emily painting it from memory. I pushed back from the table and stood. My legs had a tremor in them that had nothing to do with age. I walked to the kitchen window and stood with both hands braced on the counter, looking out at the backyard at the lemon tree Victoria had planted 3 years ago. Its leaves silver in the ambient neighborhood light. At the garden chairs pushed slightly out of alignment from the last Sunday dinner we had eaten out there, the three of us corn on the cob and iced tea, and Emily's sketchbook open on the arm of her chair. 11 years of dinners, 11 years of grocery lists and dentist appointments, 11 years of watching this woman sit outside Emily's bedroom door on the bad nights, because she had learned, as I had, that knocking sometimes made it worse. My stomach turned over so hard I had to grip the counter edge with both hands and count my exhales until the nausea receded. When I straightened up and turned back to the table, the cherry blossom was still there. 4 canvases, small, precise, patient, painted by a girl who had been 8 years old when she first put it on paper, and who had returned to it again and again, the way the mind returns to the things it cannot release, the way a tongue finds a sore tooth, the way a hand finds an old scar in the dark without being directed. Emily had not chosen to paint it. Her brain had insisted. She had been painting the truth for 13 years, and I had been living with it for 11. I stood there long enough for the clock to move from 11:53 to 12:11, long enough for the traffic on Devonshire to fall completely silent. Then I heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Soft footsteps on the hardwood. Victoria's voice drifted down the stairs low and sleep blurred. "Daniel." A pause. "You coming to bed?" I closed my eyes. My heart was hammering against my ribs with a force that seemed too large for my chest. I thought about Emily at 5 years old, in the back of the ambulance, tracing invisible shapes on a blank page with one finger. A curve and a line. A curve and a line. I thought about Marcus Teller driving off Highway 2 3 days after the Marsh family died, and the cold case file that had lived on this same table for 13 years. I thought about who had planted the lemon tree. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out level, steady, the product of 35 years of training and nothing else. "In a minute." Her footsteps moved back down the hall. The bedroom door clicked shut. I gathered the photographs into a careful stack, folded the legal pad, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the dark of my own house, daughter asleep upstairs, wife behind a closed door down the hall, and felt the specific weight of a world that had just shifted beneath my feet. I picked up my phone and typed a message to a number I had not used in 2 years. "Roy, need to talk. Tomorrow morning, early." I set the phone face down on the counter. I did not sleep. Roy Chambers was already in the booth when I walked into the coffee shop on Magnolia Boulevard in Burbank at 6:15 in the morning. He had 2 mugs in front of him and the expression of a man who had received a late-night text from an old partner and understood immediately that it was not the kind of thing you asked about over the phone. He was 58 years old, broad-shouldered with close-cropped gray hair, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades walking into rooms where things had gone badly wrong and had learned to read the air before saying anything. We had worked together for 22 years at LAPD. He had stood beside me at my retirement party 3 years ago and shaken my hand with both of his and said something I had carried with me since, and I had believed him because Roy Chambers did not say things he did not mean. He pushed the second mug toward me as I slid into the booth across from him. "You look terrible," he said. "I didn't sleep. I can see that." He wrapped both hands around his own mug. "Talk to me." I laid it out for him. All of it. The photographs of Emily's paintings, the repeating details, the magnifying glass, at midnight, the cherry blossom tattoo. I put my legal pad on the table between us and slid it across. He read through my notes without interrupting his jaw, working slightly the way it always did when he was processing something he did not want to be true. When he finished, he looked up at me. His eyes were steady and serious and full of something that might have been pain if Roy ever let pain fully reach his face. "You know what you're asking me to do," he said. "I know. You're asking me to investigate your wife." "Yes," I said. "That's why I'm asking you and not anyone else." Roy looked out the window at Magnolia Boulevard, at the early morning traffic building, slowly in the gray light. A long moment passed. Then he picked up his mug, drank, set it down. "Give me 48 hours, he said. He called me on the second evening just after 7. His voice was flat in the way that meant he had found something and wished he hadn't. "Can you come to my office?" he said. "You should see this in person." Roy's private security consulting office was a converted space above a dry cleaner on Victory Boulevard in Van Nuys. He had a desk, 2 filing cabinets, 3 monitors, and a coffee maker that ran continuously. When I arrived, he was standing at the largest monitor with his arms crossed and his back to the door, and he did not turn around when I came in. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. He turned then, and the look on his face made my chest contract sharply. "Victoria Harmon," he said. "That was her name before she married you. Before that, she went by Harmon, professionally kept her maiden name for work." He moved to the desk and picked up a printed document. She was the chief financial officer of a company called Harmon and Associates, operating out of Glendale. Financial consulting on paper. In practice, he set the document in front of me. It was a shell company, a front for an organization called Meridian Capital Group. I looked at the document. My vision had gone slightly strange around the edges, the way it does when the body is receiving information the mind is not yet prepared to accept. Meridian Capital. Roy continued, his voice careful and deliberate. Ran a money laundering operation worth approximately $47 million. They moved cash through restaurant chains, high-volume cash-heavy businesses, where inflating the numbers on paper is relatively easy to disguise, and through real estate transactions across California. Buy low, sell high, the difference comes out clean on the other side. He paused. James Marsh was hired as an internal auditor to review the books. He found everything, all of it, and he was preparing to report to the IRS and the Department of Justice. The room felt smaller than it had when I walked in. "Victoria was CFO, I said. The words came out of my mouth like something foreign. She ran the finances. Every dollar that moved through Meridian went through her, Roy said. She wasn't peripheral to this, Daniel. She was at the center of it. I pressed both hands flat on the desk and leaned my weight onto them. My arms were shaking a fine, constant tremor I could not stop. $47 million. James Marsh. November 2008. A cherry blossom tattoo on the inside of a left wrist. Who gave the order? I asked. Above her. Who ran Meridian? Roy hesitated, and Roy Chambers almost never hesitated. That alone told me the answer was going to be bad. "A man named Richard Holt," he said. 60 years old, San Francisco. CEO of a legitimate investment firm called Holt Ventures on the surface. Real estate private equity, all of it clean on paper. No criminal record. No prior investigations that went anywhere. He met my eyes. "He's been operating freely for 13 years, Daniel. And from what I can find, he is very, very careful about staying that way." I straightened up. My arms had stopped shaking, replaced by a coldness that spread from my hands up through my shoulders, the same coldness I used to feel at the start of a major investigation, when the shape of something large and dangerous first became visible in the dark. "There's more," Roy said quietly. "Tell me." After November 2008, Victoria cut all ties with Meridian completely. Resigned from Harmon, and Associates dissolved her professional connections, moved entirely into nonprofit work. Clean life, clean paper trail. Holt let her walk. He paused. "People in organizations like Meridian don't just get to walk away, Daniel, not unless there's a reason." The coldness in my chest tightened into something with edges. "What kind of reason?" I asked, though some part of me already knew I was not going to like the answer. Roy looked at me for a long moment. "That's what we need to find out." I drove home on the 101 with Roy's last words sitting in the passenger seat like a passenger I had not invited. People in organizations like Meridian don't just get to walk away, not unless there's a reason. The freeway was thick with evening traffic, the kind of slow grinding crawl that usually gave me time to decompress. Tonight, it gave me too much time to think. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and my eyes on the brake lights ahead of me, and I ran the numbers in my head, the way I used to run them on the job. Not emotional, not personal, just structural. What I knew, what I didn't know, what the gap between those two things was telling me. Victoria had been CFO of Meridian's front company. James Marsh had been hired to audit the books and had found everything. Victoria had been at the Marsh house the night the family died, and then somehow she had walked away from Meridian entirely. And Richard Holt, a man careful enough to have operated a $47 million criminal network for years, without a single arrest, had let her go. That last part did not fit. It had a ragged edge that caught on everything else when I tried to set it aside. The house smelled like garlic and olive oil when I came through the front door. Victoria was at the stove, her hair pulled back a dish towel over one shoulder. Emily was at the kitchen table with a canvas propped against a stack of books, her brush moving in short, precise strokes. The scene was so ordinary, so exactly like 10,000 other evenings in this house, that something in my chest seized up painfully, a fist closing around something it did not want to release. "Perfect timing," Victoria said, turning from the stove with a smile that reached her eyes the way it always did. "Pasta's almost done. You want to open the wine?" "Sure," I said. I opened the wine. I set the table. I sat across from my wife and my daughter and ate dinner and asked Emily about the painting she was working on. And she wrote 3 words on the notepad she kept beside her plate: mountains, night, fire, and I nodded and said it sounded powerful. Victoria talked about a grant application she was helping the nonprofit submit. I made the right noises at the right times. The whole performance cost me more than I had expected. Afterward, while Victoria loaded the dishwasher and Emily went back upstairs, I moved to my small office off the hallway and opened my laptop. I started with what was publicly available on Richard Holt press releases from Holt Ventures Business Journal profiles, charity gala photographs from San Francisco Society pages. 60 years old, silver-haired, broad smile, the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Holt Ventures ran legitimate real estate investments and private equity funds. Clean filings, clean audits, impeccable paper trail. Then I went deeper. A 2009 article in a small financial watchdog newsletter, the kind of publication that had 1,200 subscribers and was usually right about the things that larger outlets wouldn't touch, mentioned a brief IRS inquiry into a California-based financial consulting network. The inquiry had been opened in late 2008 and closed within months, citing insufficient evidence. The internal source who had prompted the inquiry had died before providing a formal statement. The source's name was James Marsh. I sat back in my chair and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw pressure light blooming in the dark. Marcus Teller had died on Highway 2 3 days after the Marsh family. The IRS inquiry had closed within weeks of Teller's death. 1 action, 2 problems eliminated. Holt had been thorough. Holt had been fast. And for 13 years, he had been invisible. I heard Victoria's footsteps in the hallway. A soft knock at the open office door. "Hey." She was leaning against the doorframe, the dish towel still over her shoulder, her expression easy and warm. Her left hand rested against the frame. The cherry blossom tattoo caught the light from my desk lamp, small, delicate, exactly as Emily had drawn it across 4 separate canvases. "You've been quiet tonight. Everything okay?" My chest was so tight, I had to concentrate on keeping my breathing even. I turned the laptop screen slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough. "I'm just tired," I said. "Long day." She studied my face for a moment, and I held her gaze and gave her nothing, because 35 years of interrogation work meant I knew exactly how to show a person only what I wanted them to see. "Get some rest," she said. "Don't stay up too late." Her footsteps moved back down the hall. The bedroom door closed. I turned back to the laptop and pulled up the search field. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment. Then I typed Victoria Harmon Glendale 2007 Meridian Capital. The results loaded. The third result was a cached photograph from a 2007 Business Awards dinner in Pasadena, a $100 a plate event recognizing emerging leaders in financial services. There in the back row of a group photograph stood a woman I recognized immediately despite the 12 years between that image and the one in my memory. Dark hair, the particular way she held herself straight-spined and contained. Victoria, younger but unmistakably Victoria, standing 2 people to her left, his hand on her shoulder, in the casual way of someone who owned the space around him, was a broad-shouldered, silver-haired man whose smile I had seen 30 minutes ago on a San Francisco Society page. Richard Holt. My stomach dropped so hard and fast it felt like a physical blow. I pressed one hand flat against the desk to keep myself anchored. On the screen, Holt's hand rested on Victoria's shoulder, and both of them were smiling at the camera, and they looked for all the world like 2 colleagues at an industry event. And nothing about the image would have meant anything to anyone who did not know what I now knew. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark of my office for a long time. The house quiet around me, my daughter asleep upstairs, my wife behind a closed bedroom door down the hall. Then I picked up my phone and sent Roy a second text. Found a photograph. Holt and Victoria together. 2007. We need Sato. Roy called at 7 the next morning, while I was standing at the kitchen counter pretending to read the news on my phone. Victoria had left early for a nonprofit board meeting in Encino. Emily was still asleep. The house was mine, and I was using the quiet to hold myself together with both hands. Sato can see us at 10, Roy said. IRS field office on Wilshire. Don't be late, he's doing us a favor just by agreeing to the meeting. I'll be there, I said. I spent the 3 hours between that phone call and the meeting doing something I had been putting off since the night before. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh legal pad, and I wrote down everything I knew about Victoria. Not as my wife, not as Emily's mother, but as a subject. The way I would have written up a person of interest in any other investigation. Timeline associations, behavioral patterns, anomalies. I had trained myself to do this for 3 decades, and I had never once thought I would use the skill on someone who slept 6 feet away from me. By the time I finished, I had 4 pages. My handwriting was steadier than I expected. That frightened me more than shaking would have. The IRS Criminal Investigation Field Office on Wilshire Boulevard occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower that looked exactly like every other glass tower on that stretch of Wilshire. Roy met me in the lobby, and we rode the elevator up without speaking. The receptionist led us down a carpeted corridor to a conference room with a view of the Santa Monica Mountains in the distance, gray-blue and hazy in the morning light. Agent Derek Sato was already seated at the table. He was younger than I expected, early 40s lean, with the kind of face that gave very little away. He wore a dark suit and no tie, and he had a folder open in front of him that he closed when we came in. He stood and shook our hands with the efficient grip of someone for whom handshakes were a professional tool rather than a social gesture. Mr. Carter, he said, Roy's told me a little about your situation. I want to hear the rest from you directly. I laid it out. 30 minutes, no interruptions, everything in order. The paintings, the tattoo, Roy's background check on Victoria, the 2007 photograph, the Marsh case timeline, Marcus Teller. Sato listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on me the entire time, and he did not write anything down, which told me he either had an exceptional memory or was already familiar with more of this than he was letting on. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the folder he had closed when we arrived and turned it so I could see the first page. Meridian Capital Group, he said. We've had an open secondary file on this organization for 9 years. Not active, we've never had enough to act on, but we've never fully closed it either. He tapped the page. The 2009 inquiry you found in that newsletter, I was a junior agent on that team. James Marsh contacted us directly before he had fully compiled his documentation. We told him to keep gathering evidence and come back to us when he had a complete picture. A pause that carried weight. He never came back. The air in the conference room felt heavier than it had a moment before. Marsh's death effectively ended the inquiry, Sato continued. Without his testimony and documentation, everything we had was circumstantial. We could see money moving, but we couldn't prove the chain of command in a way that would hold up in the court. Holt's organization was structured specifically to create distance between the top and the transactions. Every layer had plausible deniability. He looked at me steadily. Victoria Harmon was one of very few people who operated close enough to Holt to testify against him directly. When she disappeared from the picture after 2008, we lost our most viable path to him. He's been trying to keep it that way, Roy said. We think he's been monitoring anyone who gets closer to the Marsh case. When Daniel started pulling on threads, Holt's network noticed. Sato nodded slowly. That's consistent with what we've seen from his operation. He doesn't move directly if he can avoid it. He applies pressure through intermediaries, makes problems inconvenient rather than dangerous, at least at first. He paused. For 13 years, you reading a private file at your kitchen table left no digital trace. But the moment Roy started running queries through professional databases, Holt's network picked up the signal. That's what changed. He looked at me. Has anything unusual happened recently? Anyone you didn't recognize near your home or Emily's routine? I opened my mouth to say no. My phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. A text message containing a single image. I opened it and felt the floor tilt beneath my chair. Emily. Walking out of the coffee shop on Ventura Boulevard, where she spent Tuesday mornings sketching, her back to the camera, her canvas bag over one shoulder, completely unaware, shot from across the street, precise and unhurried. My hand closed around the phone so hard the case creaked. Daniel! Roy's voice came from somewhere that felt far away. What is it? I turned the phone and showed them both. Sato's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened into a different quality of attention. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, which he placed on the table in front of me with 2 fingers. That image constitutes a credible threat under federal witness intimidation statutes. He said, his voice precise and level. 18 U.S., Code Section 1512. Whoever sent that has just handed us something we can act on. He held my gaze. But right now, before anything else, we need to talk about Emily. Where is she this morning? My throat had gone completely dry. I was already reaching for my phone with my other hand to call her, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my jaw, every paternal instinct I had, screaming at a volume that made rational thought almost impossible. She's at that coffee shop, I said. On Ventura. She goes every Tuesday. Then we need to move her, Sato said, rising from his chair. Right now. Today. Do you have somewhere safe she can go without raising suspicion? Roy was already standing. She can come to my place. Margaret's home all day. I was already dialing. The phone rang 3 times. 4. My free hand gripped the edge of the conference table, and I counted the rings the way you count seconds during a crisis, 1 at a time, each one too long. Emily picked up on the 5th ring. Hey, Dad. Her voice was easy, unhurried, the ambient sound of the coffee shop behind her. What's up? Hey, sweetheart. My voice came out steady. I hated how good I still was at this. Change of plans today. I need you to wait at Ventura Brew. I'm coming to pick you up. A pause. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. I just want to see you. That okay? Another pause, shorter this time. Emily had always been able to hear the things I did not say. Okay, she said. I'll be here. I ended the call and stood up from the table. My legs held. I was grateful for that. I need to go get my daughter, I said. Sato picked up his own phone. I'll make some calls while you do, Mr. Carter. He waited until I looked at him directly. We're going to move on this. You have my word. I nodded once. Then I walked out of that conference room and down the carpeted corridor and into the elevator. And I pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close and stood there in the mirrored box as it descended. And I looked at my own reflection and barely recognized the man looking back at me. 14 floors. 14 seconds. By the time the doors opened, I had my face back. Before we go any further, comment the number 13 below. 13 years. That is how long this was buried. If you have stayed this long, I think you already understand why that number matters. A note before we continue, some elements in this story are fictional, included for educational and storytelling purposes. If you prefer content without fictional elements, this is a good moment to choose something else. No hard feelings. Ventura Brew was a narrow coffee shop, wedged between a dry cleaner and a bookstore on Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. The kind of place that had been there long enough to have regulars and not long enough to have lost them. Emily had been coming here on Tuesday mornings for 2 years, corner table by the window canvas bag on the seat beside her, a large drip coffee she nursed for 3 hours while she sketched. The staff knew her by name. They knew her order. They knew she communicated by sliding a folded note across the counter, and that she always left a 20% tip in cash. I pushed through the door and found her exactly where I knew she would be. She looked up when I came in, and her eyes did what they always did, moved across my face, quickly reading whatever I was trying not to show. Emily had been doing that since she was 7 years old. She had developed a talent for it that I suspected was directly connected to years of communicating without words. When you cannot speak, you learn to read everything else with extraordinary precision. She reached for her notepad and wrote something, then turned it toward me. "You're scared." 2 words, accurate as a scalpel. "I'm careful," I said. "There's a difference." I sat down across from her and kept my voice low and even. "I need you to pack up your things and come with me. I'm going to take you to Roy's place for a few days." She studied me for a long moment, her pencil tapping a slow rhythm against the edge of her sketchbook. Then she wrote again. "Is this about the Marsh case?" My chest pulled tight. I had not told her I was looking at the Marsh case again. I had not told anyone except Roy and now Sato. Emily had been living in the same house with me for 13 years, and apparently that was all the information she needed. "Why would you ask that?" I said carefully. She looked at me the way she always looked at me when she thought I was being deliberately slow. Then she wrote, "You've had that look for 4 days, the one you get when something in your head won't let go." I took a breath, let it out slowly. "Yes," I said. "It's connected to the Marsh case, and right now I need you somewhere I know you're safe while I figure some things out. Can you trust me on that?" She held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she closed her sketchbook, capped her pencil, and reached for her canvas bag. That was Emily's version of yes. Roy's house was a single-story craftsman on a tree-lined street in Tarzana, 20 minutes from my place. Margaret Chambers met us at the door, a warm, round-faced woman in her mid-50s who had been feeding people through difficult situations for as long as I had known her. She took one look at Emily, opened the door wider, and said, "I just made banana bread. Come tell me what you want to drink." Emily's shoulders dropped half an inch. She followed Margaret inside without looking back at me, and I stood on the front porch watching the door close behind them and felt something in my chest loosen very slightly. Not relief exactly, more like the easing of a pressure I had not realized I was holding. I walked back to my car. That was when I saw it. A black SUV parked on the opposite side of the street, 2 houses down. It had not been there when I arrived. I was certain of that. The same way I was certain of things I had trained myself to notice without consciously deciding to. Dark tinted windows. Engine off. But the driver's side mirror was angled wrong for a parked car positioned for watching rather than parking. I did not look directly at it. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb at a completely normal speed. I turned left at the end of Roy's Street onto Reseda Boulevard and checked my rearview mirror. The SUV pulled out 30 seconds behind me. My jaw tightened. I kept my speed exactly at the limit and my hands loose on the wheel, and I ran through my options the way I used to run through options on surveillance details methodically, without panic, one step at a time. Panic was a luxury I could not afford, and had not been able to afford since I was 26 years old. And Roy had talked me through my first high-stakes foot chase by saying, slowly and clearly, panic is just adrenaline that hasn't been told what to do yet. I turned right onto Ventura Boulevard. The SUV turned right. I turned left into a residential block, past a row of jacaranda trees dropping purple flowers across the asphalt. The SUV turned left. I turned right into a narrow alley behind a strip of restaurants, accelerated, sharply exited onto a parallel street, turned left, then immediately right again, into the parking structure of a grocery store on Topanga Canyon Boulevard. I drove to the 3rd level, pulled into a space near the stairwell, cut the engine, and watched the entrance in my mirror. 2 minutes passed. The SUV did not appear. I sat in the parking structure for 5 minutes, hands on my thighs, breathing deliberately, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. My phone buzzed. Sato. We intercepted a communication from Holt's network about 40 minutes ago. Sato said his voice stripped of anything except information. They're not certain what you found, but they know you've been asking questions and they're accelerating. I don't know exactly what that means for their timeline, but I know it means we can't wait. A pause. Whatever move you're going to make with Victoria Daniel, it needs to happen tonight. Not this week. Tonight. I looked out through the concrete pillars of the parking structure, at the slice of San Fernando Valley sky visible between the levels. Blue, bright, indifferent. "I understand," I said. "Are you somewhere safe right now?" "Yes." "And Emily?" "She's with Roy's wife. She's safe." "Good." Another pause shorter. Daniel, I know what I'm asking you to do tonight is one of the hardest things you've ever been asked to do. I want you to know that I understand that. I appreciated that he said it. I did not have anything to say back, so I just told him I would be in touch and ended the call. I sat there for another minute. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere in the valley and then stopped. A pigeon landed on the concrete railing in front of my car, looked at me without interest, and flew away. Then I started the engine, backed out of the space, and headed home. Victoria's car was in the driveway when I got there. She was back from her board meeting earlier than expected. The front door was unlocked. From inside, I could hear the sound of the kitchen television, a low murmur of afternoon news. I sat in my own driveway for 30 seconds, with both hands on the wheel, looking at the front door of the house I had lived in for 11 years. The lemon tree was visible at the side of the house, its leaves catching the afternoon light. I thought about Emily writing, "You're scared" on her notepad. I thought about 4 pages of handwritten notes about my wife. I thought about a photograph from 2007, a hand on a shoulder, 2 people smiling. Then I got out of the car and went inside. Before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal the truth that changed everything, I need you to do one thing. Comment "I know" if you have already figured out where this is going, and comment "Tell me" if you have not. Either way, I want to see you in that comment section before I go any further. Note what follows contains the most difficult part of this story. Some of it is fictional, shaped for meaning, not for sensation. If you need to step away, this is the moment. Victoria was in the kitchen when I came through the door, standing at the counter with a glass of water and her phone scrolling through something with the unhurried ease of a woman who believed her afternoon was her own. She looked up and smiled. "You're home early. I thought you had errands." "I did," I said. "I finished them." I did not smile back. I set my keys on the entry table, slowly, deliberately, the way I set things down when I need my hands to be steady, and walked to the living room without looking at her again. I had the photographs in a folder in my jacket, the same 14 images I had been carrying since yesterday morning, worn at the corners, now from handling, from being taken out and put back and taken out again, in the hours since I had sat at a kitchen table in the dark and understood what I was looking at. I took them out and laid them across the coffee table one by one without speaking, the way you lay evidence. Victoria followed me in. She looked at the photographs on the table, and her smile changed in a way that was almost imperceptible. Not disappearing, just losing something behind it, the way a light dims when the voltage drops. That fraction of a second told me everything I had not yet allowed myself to fully believe. Because Victoria was a naturally expressive woman, her face had always been one of the most readable things in my life. This stillness was not natural. This was the stillness of someone managing themselves very precisely. She picked up the nearest photograph and studied it, then the next. Her movements were deliberate, controlled. I watched her the way I used to watch suspects in interview rooms, not at her face, but at the small, involuntary things. The way her shoulders held, the almost imperceptible tightening around her jaw. I let her get through 4 photographs. Then I pointed to the one with the clearest rendering of the wrist. "Emily has been drawing that tattoo since she was 8 years old," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. I counted. It appears in at least 4 separate paintings across 3 years. Same size, same placement, same design. I looked at her left wrist. "I've been looking at that tattoo every day for 11 years, Victoria." The photograph she was holding trembled just slightly, just once, before she set it down with the same deliberate care she had used to pick it up. The care of someone who does not trust their own hands right now. "Daniel." Her voice came out thinner than usual, like something under pressure that has not yet found where to give. "Don't," I said. The word came out harder than I intended, and I did not pull it back. "Please don't start there, not after 11 years. She turned away from me. She walked to the window that looked out over the backyard, the lemon tree she had planted 3 years ago. The garden chairs we had pulled slightly out of alignment the last time all 3 of us ate dinner outside. She stood there with her back to me, and both hands pressed flat against the glass, and I watched the tension move through her spine, the way weather moves through a tree before the storm arrives. Her shoulders rose sharply with one breath, then dropped. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt," she said. The words landed in the room like something that had weight and temperature. I had to press my back teeth together and hold them there to keep my jaw from shaking. Not from anger, not exactly, but from the specific effort of holding 2 things simultaneously. What I had believed about this woman for 11 years, and what I now knew to be true about the night of November 14th, 2008. Because that was not a denial. That was not a question. That was a woman telling me in the only way she could force herself to do it, that there was something to deny. "I know you didn't," I said. And I was surprised to find I meant it. Surprised and furious at myself for meaning it, because it would have been so much simpler if I could have just been cold. But people got hurt anyway, 3 of them, in a house on Crescent Ridge Drive. I paused. And a 5-year-old girl hid under a bed and hasn't fully spoken since. Victoria's hands pressed harder against the glass. Her knuckles went white. A sound came out of her, small, compressed, the sound of someone swallowing something that was trying to come out in a completely different form. I did not look away. "Tell me everything," I said. My voice had gone very quiet, not soft. Quiet the way very cold things are quiet, the way the room goes. Quiet in the seconds before something breaks. From the beginning, all of it. I waited until she was still enough to hear me properly. "Because I have a meeting already arranged with an IRS criminal investigation agent who has had a file on Meridian Capital Group for 9 years. And I have a photograph of you and Richard Holt at a business dinner in Pasadena in 2007. And I have a daughter who has been painting the cherry blossom on your left wrist since she was 8 years old and never understood why she couldn't stop." My voice did not shake. 35 years of training. That was all it was. "So please," I said, "tell me everything." Victoria turned around. Her eyes were wet, not spilling, just full. The way eyes look when a person has been holding something back for so long that the holding has become the thing they are most afraid of stopping. Her face had the particular look of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has finally, in the presence of the one person they could never successfully lie to, run out of the strength to keep carrying it. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. "Okay," she said. Her voice broke on the single syllable, not dramatically, not with the force of collapse, but quietly, the way something breaks when it has simply been under too much pressure for too long. "Okay, Daniel." She looked at me directly. "I'll tell you." She told it the way people tell things they have rehearsed alone for years, not smoothly, but with the particular cadence of someone who has gone over the same ground so many times that the words have worn grooves, even if speaking them aloud for the first time makes the voice catch in unexpected places. We were sitting at opposite ends of the couch, not close. The space between us felt like something with mass. "Richard called me the afternoon of November 14th, Victoria said. Her hands were in her lap, fingers laced together so tightly the skin had gone pale at the joints. "He told me James Marsh had compiled enough documentation to take to the IRS and was planning to move within the week. He needed the files back, all of them, physical copies from Marsh's home office." She stopped, swallowed. "Cole," I said. "That's what he told me his name was." Her jaw tightened. "I thought he was a driver. I thought Richard was being cautious." She stopped. "Richard always kept things separate. I managed the finances. He never told me what happened on the operational side, and I never asked. That was the arrangement we had. I didn't know what Cole had actually been told to do until it was already too late to stop it." Her voice fractured on the next words, and she pressed her lips together and rebuilt it before continuing. She described arriving at the Marsh house after 9 in the evening. The front light was on. James Marsh answered the door himself and recognized her immediately. They had met twice during his audit. He understood within 30 seconds why she was there, and his face went through something she described as the specific collapse of a man who has been hoping he was wrong about something and has just found out he wasn't. He refused. He told her to leave. He reached for his phone. Cole moved faster than Victoria could process. She grabbed his arm. She was certain of that her fingers had found fabric and she had pulled, but the momentum was already gone. She heard the phone hit the floor. She heard James Marsh go down. Her voice dropped so low I had to lean forward to hear the next part. Linda Marsh and Tyler came downstairs. They had heard the noise from the second floor. They appeared in the living room doorway within seconds of each other, and Victoria saw Linda's face change the moment she understood what she was looking at, that particular expression of a person seeing something their mind is still refusing to fully accept. Cole did not hesitate. Victoria told me this part without detail, because there was no detail she could make herself say out loud after 13 years of trying to bury it, and I did not push her. I had worked homicides long enough to fill in what she left out. Afterward, she stood in the middle of the Marsh living room and could not move. Her phone was ringing Richard she knew without looking. Cole had walked out to the car. The house was completely still. And then she heard something from upstairs, a small sound, barely anything. She walked up the stairs. She did not know why. Some impulse she could not name and had never been able to fully explain to herself in the years since guilt or conscience or simple human reflex toward a sound that did not fit. Emily was in the corner of her bedroom between the dresser and the wall, 5 years old, star print pajamas, sketchbook pressed against her chest, with both arms her eyes open and fixed on Victoria with an expression that had no name in any language Victoria knew. Victoria's throat closed so completely she made a sound she had not meant to make, a single compressed sob that she caught before it fully escaped. I stood there, she said, her voice barely holding together, now her knuckles bone white in her lap. And my phone kept ringing, and Cole was outside, and I knew exactly what Richard would want me to do. She looked at me for the first time since she started talking, and her eyes were wrecked, red-rimmed, and absolutely direct. I couldn't do it, Daniel. She looked at me and I couldn't. My throat ached so badly I could not have spoken if I'd tried. So I didn't try. I pressed my hands flat on my knees and breathed and let her finish. I walked back downstairs, Victoria said. I got in the car. I didn't answer Richard's call until we were back on the freeway. And when I did, the first thing I said to him was that the child was alive and that it was going to stay that way. Victoria did not stop after that. Once she started, the words came out with the steadiness of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time and had finally found the crack it needed. Richard Holt had listened to her on the phone that night without interrupting. When she finished telling him the child was alive and would stay that way, there was a silence that lasted long enough for Victoria to understand exactly how dangerous the next few seconds were. Then he said very calmly that he would need certain things in return. Her complete and permanent silence. No contact with law enforcement, no cooperation with any investigation, no communication with anyone connected to the Marsh case. Immediate resignation from Harmon and Associates, and complete severance from Meridian Capital. A clean life documented and visible that would create distance between her and the organization. And if I agreed, Victoria said, Emily would not be touched, ever. He gave me his word. And you trusted that, I said. I did not say it as an accusation. I said it because I needed to understand. I trusted that he understood the math, she said. Moving against a child after the fact creates exposure, more people to ask questions, more threads to pull. Richard Holt has always been a man who weighs risk carefully. Her voice was exhausted now, stripped of everything except the facts. So yes, I trusted the math. She had spent the next 2 years rebuilding herself into someone Richard Holt could ignore. Non-profit work, volunteer hours, a paper trail of good deeds and community involvement that put as much visible distance between Victoria Harmon and Meridian Capital as 13 calendar pages could provide. She had moved through those 2 years, she said, with the specific purposefulness of someone who has decided that the only way to survive what they have done is to make themselves useful to the world in whatever way remains available to them. And then she had walked into a fundraising event in Woodland Hills in the spring of 2010 and seen me across a room. I knew who you were, she said. I had followed the case. I knew you had taken her in. She looked at her hands. I told myself I just wanted to see that she was all right, that I would go want to see that she was safe and leave. A breath that came out unsteadily. But you were sitting there and you looked like a man who was holding something together through sheer determination, and Emily had drawn you a picture and put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple, and Her voice broke, and she pulled it back. I couldn't leave. My chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with anger. Every year, she said, I told myself the silence was still worth it, that she was alive and growing and safe, and that was enough, that I had done the one thing I could do. She lifted her eyes to mine. But it was never enough, Daniel. I knew that. I just didn't know how to stop. We sat with that for a moment, not emptiness, but the particular weight of a truth that has finally been said out loud and cannot be unsaid. You understand what happens now, I said. It was not a question. Yes, she said immediately, and the quickness of it told me she had been preparing for this answer for a long time. I cooperate fully. I give them everything accounts names the complete structure of what I know about Meridian, whatever it takes to bring Richard down. She paused. And I accept whatever comes after that. It will be serious, I said. Sato was clear about that. Cooperation reduces the outcome, but it doesn't eliminate it. I know, Victoria. I waited until she looked at me. Why did you help Emily with her nightmares? Why did you go to every school event and learn her preferences and sit with her for hours while she painted? If you knew what you had done, why did you do all of that? And her eyes filled completely, then the tears spilling without any attempt to stop them tracking down her face in the way of someone who has simply run out of the capacity to hold anything back. Because she deserved it, she said, and because I couldn't give her back what I took from her, so I tried to give her everything else. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. Roy. Holt knows something is moving. His people intercepted a communication. They're nervous. Daniel, we need to act tonight. If we wait until morning, it might be too late. I looked at Victoria. She had read the expression on my face. She had always been good at that. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. Roy's porch light was on when I pulled up at 2 in the morning. The street was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs exclusively to residential neighborhoods, in the deep hours when even the dogs have given up and gone inside. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, feeling the particular weight of everything that had happened since 6:15, the previous morning, pressing down on my shoulders like something physical. Then I got out and knocked. Roy answered in 30 seconds, which told me he had not been sleeping either. He looked at my face and stepped back from the door without asking any questions, which was one of the things I had always valued most about Roy Chambers. She's in the living room, he said quietly. Been up since midnight. Margaret tried to get her to sleep around 11, but he shook his head. She knows something's happening. She's always known. The living room was lit by a single lamp in the corner, the rest of the room in shadow. Margaret had left a blanket folded over the arm of the couch and a mug of something on the coffee table that had gone cold. Emily was on the floor, cross-legged, a large sheet of paper in front of her, and a charcoal pencil moving across it in long, deliberate strokes. She looked up when I came in. I crossed the room and lowered myself to the floor beside her, not across from her, beside her at the same level the way I had learned to do when she was 7 years old, and the world was too large, and I needed her to know I was not above it either. My knees protested. I ignored them. I looked at what she was drawing, the woman in the red coat. Clearer than any version Emily had produced before the coat's specific cut, the leaf-shaped necklace at the collarbone, the left wrist extended with the small floral mark, rendered in precise, unhurried detail. The figure was standing in a doorway, and for the first time the face was not obscured by shadow or abstraction. It was turned slightly away, but there was enough the line of the jaw, the set of the shoulders, the particular way the figure held itself, to make it unmistakable to anyone who had lived with that woman for 11 years. My throat tightened until it hurt. I placed my hand gently on the edge of the paper and said, "Emily, I need you to tell me what you remember." She looked at me, and what I saw in her face was not the thing I had been bracing for. Not fear, not pain, not the shuddered withdrawal I had watched her retreat into 100 times over 13 years. What I saw was something that looked with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of me like relief. She set the charcoal pencil down. She straightened slightly. And then, in a voice I had not heard her use in a conversation that mattered since she was 5 years old. Not a whisper, not a note passed across a table, but her actual voice quiet and a little rough from disuse but entirely unmistakably hers. She said, "I've been waiting for you to ask." My eyes burned so badly I had to look at the ceiling for a moment and breathe. She remembered everything from that night, not the faces her brain had protected her from. Those Dr. Howe had been right about that, but everything surrounding them. The red coat, the silver necklace, the perfume, the cherry blossom tattoo on the inside of a left wrist caught in the light from the hallway, as the woman stood in the doorway of her bedroom and looked at her for a very long time without moving. When Victoria had come into Emily's life in 2010, Emily had recognized her within the first hour. Not with certainty she was 7, and the memory was buried under 2 years of therapy and the protective instincts of a brain that did not want to look directly at what it had seen, but with a bone-deep wrongness that she had never been able to shake. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice came out in pieces, each word requiring individual effort. "Emily, why didn't you say something?" Her hands tightened in her lap. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Not of her. I was afraid of losing you. Of losing—" She gestured at the room around her, a small, encompassing movement. "What we had. I thought if I told you everything would break apart. And I couldn't—" Her breath caught and she pushed through it. "I couldn't survive losing another family dad." the word broke something open in me that I had not known was closed. I reached out and pulled her into my arms, and she came without hesitating. No stiffness, no careful management of distance, just her arms wrapping around my back and holding on with the particular fierceness of someone who has been waiting a long time to do exactly this. I held her and felt my eyes sting and overflow, and did not try to stop it, because some things are not worth stopping. "So you painted," I said when I could speak again. Her voice came muffled against my shoulder. "I painted until you were ready to see. I knew you would get there. I just had to wait until you did." I held her tighter. After a while, she pulled back and looked at me with her face red and her eyes wet and her expression carrying something I had not seen in it before. Not the careful watchfulness of a girl managing her exposure to a world that had proved dangerous, but something more open, more present, more like the child she might have been if November 14th had never happened. "Dad," she said, her voice was steadier now. "What happens to Victoria now?" The sun was coming up over the San Fernando Valley when I pulled into my own driveway, the sky going from dark gray to pale orange in the particular slow way of Southern California mornings that have no intention of hurrying. I had left Roy's house at 4:30 with Emily asleep on the couch. Margaret's blanket pulled to her chin, her charcoal pencil still loosely in her hand. I had stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment before I left. She looked younger when she slept. She always had. Victoria was awake when I came through the door. She was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug still in the clothes she had been wearing the night before. She looked up when I came in, and there was nothing in her face that resembled hope, just the steady, exhausted readiness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the consequences to begin. "Emily's okay," I said. "She's at Roy's. She's sleeping." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet. "Good," she said. "Just that. Good." I sat down across from her. "I need you to call Sato this morning. I need you to tell him you're ready to cooperate fully. No conditions, no reservations, everything you know about Meridian, about Holt, about the financial structure, the accounts, the names, everything." "I know," she said, "and Victoria." I waited until she looked at me directly. "There is no version of this where you don't face charges. Sato was clear about that, and I'm not going to tell you otherwise." Her jaw tightened, but she did not look away. "I know that too." "Okay," I said. She called Sato at 7:15. He arrived at our house at 9 with a DOJ attorney named Patricia Wells and a digital recorder, and the kind of focused, unhurried efficiency that told me he had been prepared for this call longer than any of us had been making it. The cooperation agreement was formal, documented, and binding. Victoria would provide full testimony and documentary evidence against Richard Holt and all associated members of Meridian Capital Group in exchange for prosecutorial consideration at sentencing, not immunity. Consideration. Sato had been honest about what that meant, and Victoria had signed without flinching. She talked for 4 hours. I sat in the living room while it happened, listening to the low, steady sound of her voice through the kitchen door without being able to make out the individual words, the accounts, the shell companies, the names. 13 years of silence emptying itself out onto a digital recorder, one fact at a time. Roy arrived at 10 and sat beside me without speaking, and we drank bad coffee from the machine on the counter and watched the morning move across the living room floor in long yellow stripes. You doing okay?" Roy asked at one point. "No," I said. "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." The arrests happened faster than I expected, which told me Sato had been more ready than his careful professional manner had let on. By 4 in the afternoon, a joint task force of IRS criminal investigation agents and FBI field officers had executed simultaneous search warrants across 3 states. Richard Holt was taken into custody at his office at Holt Ventures in San Francisco at 3:47 in the afternoon, mid-sentence in a phone call, according to the brief text Sato sent me. 9 additional arrests followed within the hour. Shell companies in Nevada and Delaware were dissolved. Bank accounts in 4 countries were frozen under federal asset forfeiture statutes 18 U.S. Code, Section 982, which allows the government to seize assets directly connected to criminal activity before conviction. The financial infrastructure that had taken Holt years to construct came apart in an afternoon, the way things built on concealment tend to come apart when the first real crack appears. I watched the news coverage on my phone, standing in the kitchen, while the DOJ attorney packed up her materials at the table. A brief clip showed Holt being walked out of the Holt Ventures building by two federal agents, his hands behind his back, his silver hair bright in the San Francisco afternoon sun. He was not struggling, he was not speaking. He was looking straight ahead with the expression of a man who was already calculating his next move and finding perhaps for the first time that the calculations were not resolving the way he expected. Roy tapped my shoulder and I handed him the phone. He watched the clip, handed it back. 13 years, he said. Yeah, I said. I did not feel the thing I had expected to feel. I had thought there would be something large and definitive satisfaction or relief or the specific release of a weight that has been carried too long. What I actually felt was quieter than that, more like the absence of a sound I had grown so accustomed to that I had stopped being aware of it and was only now noticing the silence where it used to be. Victoria came out of the kitchen at 5:30. The DOJ attorney was gone. Sato shook Victoria's hand with the careful professionalism of a man who understood the complexity of what he was shaking it for, and then he left too. Roy squeezed my shoulder once and let himself out. And then it was just Victoria and me in the house that had been ours for 11 years, and neither of us quite knew what to do with that. Sato said the arraignment will be scheduled within the next 2 days, Victoria said. She was standing near the window, the evening light coming through at a low angle, catching the silver at her temples. Federal court downtown. I know, I said. She nodded. Then she said, "Is Emily going to be all right?" The question landed somewhere it was not entirely expected, and I had to take a moment before I could answer it honestly. Yes, I said. I think she is. For the first time in a long time, I actually think she is. Victoria pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled again, and this time she let them just stood there by the window and let the tears track down her face without lifting a hand to stop them. Good, she said in the same tone she had used that morning. Just that word. Just good. Outside, the San Fernando Valley evening was settling in the streetlights coming on, one by one, the sky going from orange to deep blue above the roof lines. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business as if this particular day had been like any other. It had not been like any other. The United States District Court for the Central District of California occupied a federal building on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles, a tower of glass and pale concrete that caught the morning light in a way that made it look almost luminous from a distance and entirely utilitarian up close. I arrived at 7:45, 90 minutes before the scheduled arraignment, and stood on the sidewalk for a while, with my hands in my jacket pockets, looking up at the building and feeling the particular strangeness of being on this side of a federal proceeding. In 35 years of law enforcement, I had walked into courthouses as a witness, as an investigator, as the person whose evidence was being presented. I had never walked in as the husband of the defendant. Roy fell in to step beside me on the sidewalk. He had driven downtown separately, which was like him giving me the space to arrive on my own terms, while making sure I did not arrive alone. You ready? He said. No, I said. Good, he said. Honest answer. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected. Federal arraignments are procedural, not theatrical, and the room reflected that. Fluorescent lighting, wooden benches, the low murmur of attorneys conferring in corners. Sato was already there, standing near the back wall with a younger agent I did not recognize. He caught my eye and gave a single nod. I nodded back. Victoria was brought in at 9:05. She was wearing civilian clothes, a gray blouse, dark slacks, her hair pulled back simply. No jewelry. Her hands were not cuffed, which was standard for a cooperative defendant arriving for arraignment rather than having been held overnight. But there was a U.S. Marshal at her shoulder, and that presence changed the geometry of her in a way that was difficult to look at directly. She moved with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and she did not look for me in the room until she was seated at the defense table. When she did find me, she held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked back at her attorney. The U.S. Attorney's Office had filed 3 counts. Felony murder under California Penal Code. Section 189, aiding and abetting, meaning Victoria had been present during the commission of a felony that resulted in death, which under California law was sufficient for the charge regardless of whether she had directly participated. Conspiracy to commit fraud under 18 U.S. Code. Section 1349. Obstruction of justice under 18 U.S. Code Section 1503, covering her 13 years of deliberate silence regarding a federal investigation. The federal judge, a compact silver-haired man named Calloway, who wore his authority the way experienced judges do, without emphasis, read the charges in a measured, unhurried voice. Victoria's defense attorney entered a plea of not guilty on all 3 counts, which was standard procedure at arraignment, regardless of any cooperation agreement. The formal plea arrangement would come later, at a subsequent hearing, once the full scope of her testimony had been assessed by the prosecution. Sato leaned close to me during a brief procedural pause and said quietly, "With the cooperation agreement and no prior record, the prosecution is going to recommend 12 to 15 years at sentencing. That's not nothing, but it's not life." "I know," I said. She understood that going in. "I know that too," I said. The whole proceeding lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes to process 13 years. I sat on the wooden bench with Roy beside me and watched the machinery of federal justice move through its careful, deliberate paces. And I thought about a house on Crescent Ridge Drive in the rain, and a little girl in star print pajamas and a cold case file that had lived on my kitchen table for a decade, and the way time folds things together until the beginning and the end are sitting in the same room. When Victoria was escorted out, she turned once more. She was looking for Emily. I realized a reflex the way you look for the people who matter most in any room. When she did not find her, something moved across her face that was too complicated to name. She squared her shoulders and walked through the door. Outside, the September morning had warmed considerably. Roy and I stood on the Spring Street sidewalk while the city moved around us, courthouse workers, attorneys with rolling briefcases, a food truck already doing business near the corner, the ordinary machinery of a city that had not paused for any of this. "What now?" Roy said. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. "Emily," I answered immediately. "Hey." Her voice was steadier than I expected. "Roy's wife told me what happened this morning. The court thing." A pause. "Dad, can I see her? Before they move her somewhere permanent." My chest tightened. I looked at Roy. He was already nodding before I said anything, which was again one of the things I valued most about him. "Let me call Sato," I said. "I'll make it happen." "Okay," Emily said. Then very quietly, "Thank you." She ended the call before I could respond, which was like her. She had always found endings easier than the moments just before them. I stood on the sidewalk with the phone in my hand, and the September sun warm on my face, and I thought about everything she had carried alone for 11 years, and everything she was choosing to do with it now. "Well," Roy said beside me, reading whatever was on my face with the accuracy of a man who had known me for over 2 decades. "She's something, that kid of yours." "Yeah," I said. My voice came out thicker than I intended. "She really is." Emily was waiting on Roy's front porch when I pulled up her canvas bag on her shoulder and a cardboard tube tucked carefully under one arm. She had changed out of the clothes she had slept in and pulled her hair back, and there was something in her posture, a particular straightness, a deliberateness that reminded me with a force that caught me off guard of the way Victoria had looked, walking into the courtroom that morning. She got in the car without a word and set the cardboard tube carefully across her knees. "What's in the tube?" I asked. "Something I've been keeping," she said. "For a long time." I did not ask anything more. I pulled away from the curb and drove. We were on the 101 before she spoke again. "I don't hate her, Dad." She was looking out the passenger window, her reflection faint against the passing landscape. "I've thought about it a lot over the years, whether I should, whether that would be easier or cleaner or whatever, but I don't." "I know," I said. "Does that make sense to you?" Her voice was genuinely asking, not testing. "Given everything..." I thought about Victoria signing the cooperation agreement without flinching. I thought about her sitting outside Emily's bedroom door during the nightmares in the early years, because she had learned as I had that knocking sometimes made it worse. I thought about 13 years of a woman trying to give back what she could not give back. "Yes," I said. "It makes complete sense to me." Emily turned from the window and looked at me directly. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, and they held the particular steadiness of someone who has done their crying in private and come out the other side of it. "Okay," she said. "Good." The Metropolitan Detention Center on Alameda Street was a federal facility, gray concrete, high fencing, the institutional blankness of a place designed to be functional rather than welcoming. Sato had arranged the visit through proper channels, and we were processed quickly. IDs, checked bags, inspected the cardboard tube, examined and cleared. A corrections officer led us down a corridor that smelled like floor cleaner and recycled air to a visitation room at the end of a hall. Victoria was already there when they brought us in. She was sitting at a table in the center of the room. No glass partition, no phone receiver, just a table and chairs in a room with fluorescent overhead lighting and a window that looked onto a concrete courtyard. She was wearing the facility's standard issue clothing now, and the change of it, the removal of the ordinary texture of her daily life, made her look both smaller and somehow more herself, stripped of every external thing down to just the person underneath. She looked up when the door opened. When she saw Emily, her breath left her body in a sound that was not quite a word, a small compressed exhalation that carried an entire conversation's worth of feeling in it. Her hands flat on the table in front of her began to shake. Emily crossed the room and sat down across from her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and I stood near the door and let them have it that moment because it did not belong to me. Then Emily reached for the cardboard tube. She uncapped it carefully, coaxed the contents out with 2 fingers, and unrolled a sheet of paper on the table between them. The paper was old, creased at the corners, slightly yellowed, the kind of aging that happens over 10 years under a mattress. On it, in the deliberate crayon strokes of an 8-year-old who was already more precise than most adults, was a drawing, a man standing in a doorway. The hallway behind him was dark, but the light from the room fell across his shoulders and outlined him in warm gold, so that he appeared to be standing inside his own halo. He was tall and solid and utterly unmoving the way things are in drawings made by children, who understand at some level below language what they are trying to preserve. At the bottom, in the careful printed letters of a second grader, "The man who came when everything broke." Victoria stared at it. Her face did something I had never seen a human face do before. It did not crumple or collapse or go through the sequential stages of grief that faces usually go through. It simply opened all at once, every layer of composure and management and careful control falling away simultaneously. The way a building comes down when the thing holding it up is finally removed. And then she pressed both hands over her mouth and bent forward over the table and sobbed great wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. The kind of crying that has been compressed for so long, it comes out with the force of something structural finally giving way. Emily watched her for a moment. Her own chin was trembling, her eyes filling rapidly, one tear tracking down her left cheek and then another. Then she stood up, walked around the table, and put her arms around Victoria. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the gesture did not already contain. Victoria's arms came up and wrapped around Emily and held on with the particular desperation of someone who has been given something they know they do not deserve and cannot bring themselves to let go of anyway. And Emily held on back, her face pressed against Victoria's shoulder, her whole body shaking now too. I stood near the door with my throat so tight I could not have produced a sound if I had tried, and I watched the 2 people I loved most in the world hold each other in a room that smelled like floor cleaner, and I did not try to make sense of it, or name it, or fit it into any category I had available. Some things are not meant to be categorized. After a while, Emily pulled back. She wiped her face with the back of her hand in the unself-conscious way she had always had, the way she had wiped paint from her fingers since she was 6 years old. She looked at Victoria steadily. "I needed you to have that," she said. Her voice was rough but clear. "I've been keeping it for a long time, and I needed you to have it." Victoria looked at the drawing still spread on the table. Her hands were shaking too much to pick it up. She pressed them flat on either side of it, instead steadying herself. "Thank you," she whispered. The words came out barely audible, wrecked and genuine, and entirely insufficient and exactly right. On the drive home, Emily leaned her head against the passenger window and watched the city go by. The afternoon light was going golden over the rooftops, the kind of light that makes Los Angeles look briefly and probably beautiful. "She's going to be okay," Emily said, not a question. I thought about the drawing and Victoria's hands shaking on either side of it, and the way she had held Emily with the specific desperation of someone receiving a grace they had not expected. "Yeah," I said. "I think she is." Emily closed her eyes. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent and enormous and entirely unaware of what had just happened in a visitation room on Alameda Street. The transport vehicle came at 8 in the morning. I had not known exactly when it would arrive. Sato had given me a window of time rather than a specific hour, which was standard for federal transfers. But Emily had woken up early and asked if we could be there, and so we were. We stood on the sidewalk outside the Metropolitan Detention Center on Alameda Street. In the early morning light, the city not yet fully awake around us, a few other people gathered nearby for similar reasons, all of us doing the particular kind of waiting that has no good posture for it. Emily stood beside me with her arms crossed over her chest, not against the cold. It was already warm, the way Los Angeles mornings in late summer are warm before they become hot. But the way people cross their arms when they are bracing themselves for something they have decided to face straight on. The vehicle pulled around from the facility's rear entrance at 8:12, a white transport van with federal markings moving at the measured speed of institutional inevitability. Through the tinted side window, barely visible a figure, Emily lifted her hand and held it there. The van slowed not enough to stop, not a scheduled pause, but enough. And in the window, the figure turned. Victoria's face appeared for a moment in the glass, pale and small, and looking directly at us. Her right hand came up and pressed flat against the window from the inside. Emily's breath hitched sharply beside me. Her hand was still raised, her fingers spread. Then the van rounded the corner and was gone. Emily stood with her arms still raised for 3 full seconds after the vehicle disappeared. Then she lowered it, slowly pressed her lips together hard, and exhaled through her nose with the controlled steadiness of someone pushing something very large back down to where they can manage it. She did not speak, but she reached over and found my hand and held it, her fingers tight around mine, and we stood there on the sidewalk together until the sound of the van's engine had fully faded and there was nothing left to listen for. That afternoon, Emily went to see Dr. Howe. I drove her to the office on Ventura Boulevard and waited in the car. 1 hour became 90 minutes. When Emily came out, she looked different, in a way I could not immediately name, not lighter exactly, but less compressed, like something that had been held at a pressure it was not designed to sustain had finally been allowed to decompress slowly at its own rate. Dr. Howe called me while I was pulling out of the parking lot. "She talked today," Howe said. Her voice carried the particular warmth of someone who has waited a long time for a specific thing and has finally seen it happen. "Really talked, Daniel. About the night, about Victoria, about you, about all of it." A pause. "She's been carrying this alone for a very long time, but she's going to be okay. She is genuinely structurally going to be okay. I want you to know that." My eyes stung badly enough that I had to pull over for a moment. "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for all 13 years of it." "She did the work," Howe said. "I just kept the light on." Roy met me at the park on Balboa Boulevard. In the early evening, the same bench we had sat on 100 times over 22 years, under the same sycamore tree that had grown considerably larger since the first time we sat there after a difficult case in 2003, and Roy had told me that the job takes what you let it take, and you have to decide in advance how much that is going to be. We drank coffee from paper cups and did not talk for a while, which was something we had always been able to do comfortably. "What happens now?" Roy said eventually. I looked out across the park, a man walking a dog, 2 kids on a climbing structure, the ordinary population of a Tuesday evening in the San Fernando Valley going about its ordinary business. "I go home," I said. "I raise my daughter. I figure out what the next part looks like." Roy nodded. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "You know the department made another noise about reinstatement last week. Sato mentioned it." "I heard," I said, "and I thought about it for a moment. Genuinely thought about it the way you think about something you want to give a real answer to. The badge, the work. 35 years of walking into the worst days of other people's lives and trying to make something useful out of the wreckage." "No," I said. "That part's done." Roy looked at me. "You sure?" "Emily got into UCLA," I said. "She found out last week. She hasn't decided yet whether she's going to go or defer or what, but..." I stopped. Tried to find the right words and settled for the honest ones. "She needs someone at home right now who isn't somewhere else in his head. That's the job. That's the whole job." Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were the best detective I ever worked with. I mean that." "You told me that at my retirement party," I said. "I meant it then too," he said. "Doesn't mean it's not still true." I finished my coffee. The park was going golden around us, the sycamore dropping its late summer leaves in the slow, unhurried way of trees that have been doing this long enough to know it will happen again. That night after Emily had gone upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table. The Marsh file was there. It was always there, the same battered manila folder it had lived in for 13 years. the corners soft from handling the edges of the documents inside, worn thin from being read and reread in the hours after midnight by a man who could not let something go that had no clear place to go. I sat with it for a long time without opening it. Then I stood up, carried it to the filing cabinet. In the corner of the kitchen, opened the bottom drawer, the one that held the old documents. The closed cases, the things that were finished, and placed it inside. I did not throw it away. It still held the names of 3 people who deserved to be remembered. But I closed the drawer, and I did not feel the need to open it again. I was still standing at the cabinet when I heard Emily's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her paint-stained sweatshirt, her hair loose, holding a rolled canvas loosely in one hand. "You put it away," she said, looking at the closed cabinet drawer. "Yeah," I said. She studied the drawer for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and deliberately, the way she nodded when something was true, and she was acknowledging it formally. "Good," she said. She crossed the kitchen and sat down at the table. She unrolled the canvas partway, not showing it to me, yet just holding it loosely in her hands. "I've been working on something," she said. "I want to show you tomorrow, outside if the weather's okay." She looked up. "In the garden." "Okay," I said. She rolled the canvas back up, tucked it under her arm, and stood. "Night, Dad," she said. "Good night, Em." She went back upstairs. I stood in the kitchen in the quiet, listening to the sound of her footsteps overhead, back to her room, the soft click of her door. The ordinary sounds of a house where someone is home and safe. I turned off the kitchen light. Outside the San Fernando Valley, night settled in around the house, warm and dark, and full of the small sounds of ordinary life. Continuing a neighbor's television. A car on Devonshire, the lemon tree in the backyard, moving slightly in a breeze I could not feel from inside. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the lemon tree. Then I went to bed. Spring came to the San Fernando Valley the way it always does not, with announcement but with accumulation. One morning, the air smelled different. The jacaranda on the corner of Devonshire started dropping its purple flowers onto the sidewalk. The lemon tree in the backyard put out new growth at the tips of every branch, small and bright green against the older leaves. Emily noticed these things before I did. She always had. It was a Saturday in late March when she came downstairs with the canvas under her arm and said simply, "Today, if you're not busy." I was not busy. I had not been particularly busy since the fall, and I had stopped apologizing for that. The work of the previous years, the job, the case, the long wait of everything that had accumulated since a November night in 2008 had given way to something quieter and more immediate. Groceries, dinners, driving Emily to her Thursday sessions with Dr. Howe, which she still kept, not because she needed to in the way she once had, but because she had decided she liked the person she was becoming inside that office and wanted to keep becoming her. We carried 2 chairs out to the garden and set them up near the lemon tree, which was heavy with fruit. Now, the yellow bright against the morning sky. Emily sat down and held the canvas in her lap without unrolling it yet. She was wearing paint-stained jeans and an old flannel shirt that had originally been mine, and her hair was loose and slightly tangled from sleep. And she looked the word that came to me was settled. Not happy in the uncomplicated way of people who have not been through anything, but settled the way a thing is when it has found the place it belongs. The UCLA letter was on the kitchen table inside. It had arrived 3 weeks ago, acceptance into the College of the Arts for the fall semester, a partial scholarship, a note from the admissions office that described Emily's portfolio submission as exceptional and unusually mature in its emotional range. She had read it twice, set it down, and gone back to the canvas she was working on without saying anything. Later that evening, she had written on the kitchen whiteboard, "I think I want to go," and then below it in smaller letters, "Is that okay?" I had erased both lines and written, "It's more than okay. It's exactly right." She had smiled at the whiteboard for a long moment, then she had erased that too. Now she sat in the garden with the canvas in her lap, and the morning was warm without being hot, and a hummingbird was doing something aggressive with the feeder I had hung from the eave of the back porch, and everything was very ordinary in the specific way that things are ordinary when you have stopped taking ordinary for granted. "Okay," Emily said. "Ready." "Ready," I said. She unrolled the canvas. I had been prepared in some vague way for something that would require interpretation, the way her work usually did, the way I had learned to look at her paintings over years of looking, finding the thing inside the thing, reading the language beneath the surface. I had been prepared to look carefully and slowly, and find what she was saying in the space between what was visible. I was not prepared for this. It was the simplest thing she had ever made. Two figures standing side by side, one taller, one younger, the proportions, roughly right for a man and a young woman who had been a little girl when they found each other. They were standing in light, not dramatic light, not the kind of light that makes a statement, just ordinary afternoon light, warm and yellow, the kind that comes through the windows of a house where people live. There were no shadows pulling at the edges. There was no darkness gathering in the corners. There was no figure in a red coat, no shape watching from outside the frame. There was just light and two people standing in it, and the sense communicated through nothing more complicated than color and proximity. And the way Emily had painted the space between the two figures, not as separation, but as connection, that these two people had been through something and had come out the other side of it together. At the bottom right corner in Emily's handwriting, not the careful printed letters of a child this time, but the confident cursive of a young woman who had decided she had something to say and was saying it, "Thank you for choosing me, Dad." I looked at the painting for a long time. My throat did something it had not done since the night in Roy's living room, when Emily had said, "I've been waiting for you to ask it," closed entirely, and then opened again, in a way that hurt the specific hurt of something that has been compressed for too long, finally being allowed to expand. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth, breathed, looked at the lemon tree, looked at the hummingbird, which had won its argument with the feeder, and was drinking now suspended and iridescent in the morning light. Then I looked at Emily. She was watching me with the careful attention she had always given to the things that mattered most, reading my face the way she had read it since she was 7 years old, with the precision of someone who had learned that what people said and what they meant were often separated by a distance that only careful watching could bridge. I reached over and put my arms around her. She leaned into it fully, the way she had in Roy's living room. No careful management of distance, no protective positioning, just her head against my shoulder and her arms around my back and her whole self, present in the gesture without reservation. We stayed like that for a while. The hummingbird finished and left. The lemon tree moved slightly in a breeze that came and went. The morning continued doing what mornings do. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet and bright, and she was almost smiling, the kind of almost that is more honest than a full smile, because it is still in the process of becoming. "I've been working on it since December," she said. "I kept changing it. It took me a long time to get the light right." "You got it right," I said. My voice was not entirely steady, and I did not try to make it so. She looked at the painting, then back at me. "I was thinking, when I go to UCLA in the fall, I want to leave this here. In the house." She paused. "So the house remembers." "The house will remember," I said. She nodded satisfied. Then she rolled the canvas carefully the way she always handled things she had decided to keep, and sat back in her chair and turned her face up toward the morning sun with her eyes closed the way people do when they are trying to hold on to exactly the feeling they are having in exactly this moment. I sat beside her and let the quiet be what it was. After a while, my phone buzzed. "Roy. Just checking in. You two okay?" I typed back. "We're good, Roy. We're really good." I put the phone in my jacket pocket and looked at the garden, the lemon tree, the hummingbird feeder, the two chairs sitting in the morning light, the ordinary and particular beauty of a Saturday in late March in the San Fernando Valley, which had never asked permission to be beautiful and did not require anyone to notice. I thought about James Marsh and Linda and Tyler. I thought about a November night and a little girl in star print pajamas and a sketchbook held against her chest, like the last solid thing in the world. I thought about 13 years of a kitchen table and a cold case file and the particular weight of something unfinished. I thought about what it means to finish something, not to erase it, not to pretend it did not happen, but to carry it to the place where it can be set down. Not forgotten, just no longer, the thing you are always in the middle of. Emily had her eyes still closed, her face still tilted up. I thought this is what it looks like when it is over, when you have done what you could do and the people you love are still here, and the morning is warm and there is fruit on the lemon tree and your daughter is sitting beside you in the garden with her face turned toward the light. This is what it looks like. I did not say any of that out loud. I did not need to. Emily already knew she had painted it after all in the only language that had ever come naturally to her, in colors that did not need translation. I sat in the garden beside my daughter and let the morning be enough. It was. I have spent a long time thinking about what this family story taught me. Family betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it lives inside the same house, sits at the same table, and wears a face you love. And yet even family betrayal can lead somewhere that looks like healing if someone chooses to stay. I was not a perfect man. I buried myself in guilt for 13 years instead of fully living. If this family story taught me anything, it is this: do not wait until everything breaks before you look at what is standing right in front of you. God gave me Emily. I thought I was saving her. I was wrong. She saved me. My personal belief is simple family is not about blood. It is about who stays, who chooses you, and who keeps the light on when everything goes dark. Family betrayal hurts most because it comes from those we never thought to protect ourselves from. But love, real love, survives even that. If this family story moved something in, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Note: some stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely for meaningful storytelling and educational purposes. If this content is not for you, we completely respect that. Please feel free to explore whatever speaks to your heart.